What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the content section of the site. Today we are going to be touching on meet day hydration. So it does sound, and it sort of is tailored more towards the powerlifting industry, although there are certainly some good take homes that you can take here, regardless of whether you compete in powerlifting, bodybuilding, or you just go to the gym. In terms of understanding hydration, especially from an electrolyte standpoint, there's a lot of take homes in this video. So, a little disclaimer, we're going to be looking more so at sort of the electrolyte side of hydration today, opposed to sort of the carbohydrate or liquid side of hydration. Now, by no means am I indicating that, either of which are more important than the other. We need all of these to adequately be hydrated. But in terms of today's video, we are going to focus more on the electrolytes, so sort of sodium, potassium, magnesium and calcium primarily. So my little two-piece on sugar and water for today, or carbohydrates and water for today, I'm going to give you a couple of points on each. So carbohydrates or sugar stimulate the kidney to release water. And so at a competition, when we are trying to adequately be hydrated in order to get on the platform, the last thing we want to do is take on so much sugar yet so little salt and other electrolytes that we end up going to the toilet repeatedly. We wee out and dilute all of our electrolyte storages, and we end up actually being majorly dehydrated. We cramp, and performance obviously is just rock bottom when this happens. And so it's important that if we are going to load carbohydrates, we have to adequately match that in terms of the electrolyte and liquids as well. Otherwise, we're going to run into that issue I've just touched on. When looking at carbohydrates on a meet day, I would like to see you taking on multiple different sources of carbohydrates to really maximize the amount of transportation agents that we can utilize, and see the most amount of carbohydrates being absorbed. So an example of how to do this in action would be dextrose and orange juice, for example, which is a common coupling for me and my guys. I like to see the fructose from the orange juice with the abundance of other micronutritional benefits from orange juice stimulating the liver to convert your thyroid hormone, to convert thyroid from T4 to T3, the inactive to active, and also obviously with it being a carbohydrate, it's also monosaccharide, the simplest form of carbohydrate we also call a sugar monosaccharide. This in combination with the dextrose is really going to maximize the amount of carbohydrates we can uptake. So that's my two piece on carbohydrates. Water, a little bit of a myth buster. Clear urine doesn't always mean that you're adequately hydrated, and a lot of people will generally presume that if they've got clear urine and they're drinking a lot of water that they're hydrated. Actually, it could be the complete opposite. Water obviously is going to dilute your electrolyte stores, and so it's important that you are adequately hydrating across all variables to ensure that you are adequately hydrated. Otherwise, obviously, you're just going to dilute those storages. In terms of assessing hydration and assessing how well hydrated am I, clear urine's, it is an indicator somewhat, but in terms of the accuracy of that indicator, it's not very good. I would way rather you be assessing things like vasopressin levels, as they're far more accurate. In an adequate meet day hydration protocol, we would control for far more electrolytes than just the four we're going to touch on in this video, but for the sake of keeping this video relatively brief, we are only going to touch on sodium, potassium, magnesium and calcium. Now, in terms of a hierarchy of electrolytes, I don't really think there is one. If I were, or if I do, it would look a little bit like sodium and potassium being your primary focus, magnesium and calcium being your secondary focus. But for me, I would like to see you control for all electrolytes, really. So we're going to kick it off with sodium. In terms of a source for sodium, obviously the primary source of sodium is salt. You generally won't look anywhere else for your sodium beyond salt. Now, in terms of which salt, the common go-to is pink Himalayan sea salt, which I think is great. I would generally suggest that you choose something such as pink Himalayan sea salt, Redmond real salt, or even iodized salt. Avoid table salt. The problem with table salt is that it's only around 40 to 45% sodium due to the fact that it's sodium chloride. And so in terms of your bang for your buck here, in terms of gaining sodium in your diet, I would sort of leave the table salt to one side and look at one of the three there. Iodized salt is often an overlooked form of sodium. Iodine is incredibly important, obviously, for maintaining a healthy thyroid, for stimulating thyroid hormone. And so for me, I think that often one that is overlooked and one that I certainly use, and admittedly I do prefer pink Himalayan sea salt for taste, but iodized table salt, no, iodized salt is a fantastic alternative, or that of Redmond real salt. In terms of the dosage for sodium, I would generally run with a rule of thumb of 8 grams per gallon of water that you drink. For me, I take on around 12 grams a day, but a rule of thumb that seems to generally work would be 8 grams per gallon of water that you drink. Now, why should we have so much sodium? This is a common question, and I'm not going to dig too much into the whole salt is healthy argument. But I do have quite a lot to say on that, and there's a lot of literature to back my hypothesis. If you're interested in what my thought process is for salt and sodium towards sort of health issues and heart problems, then please drop me a message to the Instagram on the screen. I'm more than happy to give you my two piece and an abundance of literature to support that. But in terms of performance, it's incredibly crucial that we are adequately controlling for sodium on a meet day. Not only is it going to increase our blood volume, which is then going to sort of bring so much more nutrients, so much more oxygen and blood flow to the active muscles, which obviously is crucial on a meet day. But also it's going to bring in more water to the muscles, so and more intracellular water retention. And we can expect to see this contribute to better integrity of joints, strength, explosiveness, power. And so realistically, this is one that, it's a non-negotiable within a hydration protocol on a meet day. Next up on the list, potassium, arguably the second most important electrolyte to control for if there is a hierarchy. An RDA for potassium would be at 4.7 grams per day, dependent on the individual. And for me, this is adequate. I'm happy with 4.7 grams. Sources for potassium would sit mainly for me with potato and spinach. Obviously, dependent on the size of the potato, we can yield around 1,000 milligrams or a gram per potato. Similarly with spinach, with 4 cups of spinach we can yield also 1,000 milligrams or a gram. And so you can see really how easy it is to accumulate your daily potassium goal if you are mindful and control for this. Now, in and around a meet day, to provide some context to the video, I would look more so at the spinach on the meet day, if at all. If you're competing, in the morning, I'd maybe take a little bit alongside your breakfast, or if you're lifting in the afternoon, I'd couple a little bit in with at least one of the pre-lift meals. But if you control for it adequately the day before, it's not going to be my main concern on the meet day. On the evening prior to the competition, I would certainly look at getting in some potato. I would leave the potato to at least sort of 18 hours prior, just due to the digestive issues that come with potato. So I'd keep that well away, but I would include potato. I think it's fantastic. And also spinach. If we couple spinach with a meat source or a protein source in general, this is going to stimulate gastric acid release, which obviously is going to control for a more advantageous stomach pH in terms of the uptake and absorption of the food. And so for me, I would like to see a potato and a spinach go down with a meat source in the evening before, and then obviously a yogurt and dark chocolate meal pre-bed, which I'll touch on when we come on to magnesium. So the final thing I'm going to touch on with potassium that brings me really well onto the next electrolyte we're going to look at, being magnesium, is its ability to control for and lower blood pressure. Magnesium we'll move on to now vasodilates the blood vessels, and so essentially if we can vasodilate, we're going to see an improvement in the blood pressure due to the fact that there is less sort of pressure on the external wall of the blood vessel. And so in terms of maintaining a healthy blood pressure, promoting a parasympathetic nervous system, which is obviously going to be very, very necessary on the night prior to competing. This is really advantageous and a tool that we need to be using in an electrolyte we need to be controlling for. Another fantastic benefit of magnesium is its ability to transport nutrients around the body, and obviously on a meet day when we need to be as fueled as we can, we are going to benefit massively from having a transporting agent, or a transporting agent, I think we should call it, bringing active oxygen and nutrients around the body to the working muscles. Which brings me on to the sources and the recommended daily allowance. So I'm pretty sure that the RDA for magnesium sits at around sort of 300 to 450 milligram, dependent on gender and weight and age and all this. But if you as someone who trains, and especially someone competing, I would near more towards the top of that, so sort of 400 or 450 milligrams. In terms of sources, probably spinach, dark chocolate and yogurt are going to be your go-tos, which brings me on to the pre-bed meal, which I was touching on earlier, which I would say is absolutely necessary the night before a competition, and generally every night. For me, I really like a Greek yogurt with dark chocolate and whey. Not only is this meal, if we run with sort of 300 grams of yogurt and 30 grams of whey, for example, we're going to look at around 50 grams of protein. So in terms of adhering to a protein goal and satisfying muscle protein synthesis, this meal is fantastic. But again, we're going to see the casein within the yogurt, which is going to contribute to feeding the brain overnight, but also the magnesium that comes within the dark chocolate and the polyphenol content, which are going to really aid that parasympathetic nervous system, bringing blood pressure down and promoting a good night's sleep. So I really would look at incorporating quite a high magnesium meal pre-bed in the sense of yogurt, whey and dark chocolate, and that would pretty much cover your adequate hydration for magnesium. The final electrolyte we're going to look at in this video is calcium, where there's often this misconception that it's an electrolyte that you only control for when you're younger and your teeth and bones are growing. But realistically, its benefits in not only reducing cramping, which we'll touch on in the next video, but also its ability to improve performance and health are actually, non-trivial. And so for me, it's an incredibly important electrolyte that we must control for, especially in and around the meet day. All variables will contribute to cramping, all electrolytes. But for me, sodium and calcium are absolutely non-negotiables on a meet day, because if you cramp up on a meet day, even if you can get that sort of back on track, game over. You're never going to be at the top of your game. And so we need to really control and ensure that we are minimising the risk of cramping within a meet day. In terms of a recommended daily allowance, 1200 milligrams is sound. Sources, dairy, not supplements. There was a meta-analysis done on comparing dairy calcium sources with supplemental calcium sources, so like tablets or powders or stuff like that. And it was shown that actually we can see a large increase in the risk of cardiovascular disease through supplementing calcium compared to that of a dairy source of calcium. And so, there's a big enough turnover for you to switch your calcium sources to dairy if you can do so. So for me, milk, yogurt, cheese, fantastic dairy sources. We can't really talk about calcium without touching on vitamin D3 and vitamin K2. Vitamin D3 is going to take that calcium that we've eaten and allow us to absorb far more of it. And the vitamin K2 is then going to allow us to take that newly greater absorbed amount of calcium and shunt it to the right areas. So it's going to take it away from the bloodstream, push it into the bones, the teeth, the sarcomeres where we need it most. I think vitamin D3 would warrant its own video, and I'm probably going to do that and not touch on it too much here, but we need to be controlling for vitamin D3 regardless of whether or not you're concerned about your calcium uptake. Vitamin D3 is primarily synthesized through the skin, and so if you live in somewhere like the UK, for example, where sunlight exposure is limited, we need to be supplementing vitamin D3. I suggest this one from Bulk Powders. Fantastic, very, very cheap, 5,000 IU per capsule. One of those a day, or if it's the winter, maybe 2 a day. And you'd be adequately hydrating your vitamin D3, and that should be sufficient. But as I say, if we can take this calcium from, stage 1 to 3 almost through the utilisation of vitamin K2 from egg yolks, vitamin D3 from supplementation, why would we not do that? And so that's going to essentially wrap up electrolyte hydration. So the key take homes here are, if you're going to push carbohydrates on a training day, on a competition day, just ensure that you're adequately coupling that with adequate liquid hydration and electrolyte hydration. Otherwise, you are unfortunately going to stimulate your kidneys to release water, piss out all of your hydration, and be dehydrated and probably cramp and go home crying. So if we can, let's make sure that we can couple that hydration alongside the liquid and electrolytes. Water doesn't always directly hydrate you, and urine isn't a clear indicator as to how hydrated we are, and we should look elsewhere at things like vasopressin levels for assessing hydration. And then let's control, please, on a meet day, sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium as an absolute minimum. That is the non-negotiable bare minimum that we need to control for in terms of electrolyte hydration. As usual, if you require any additional support with anything I've touched on in this video, if you would like any of the literature that I've used to bring these points to life almost, on YouTube I will have them linked below. On the website there isn't an area for me to do that, but as I say, drop me a message on Instagram and I can send you over all relevant literature. And yeah, that's pretty much it. If you've got any requests for videos to be done or anything to say at all, drop me a message on Instagram and I'll see you in the next video.